of Suriname, Ambassador Karamat, Your Excellency, the Ambassador from Tobago, Mr. Victor McIntyre, Your Excellency, the President of the United States of America, Mr. Jimmy Carter, the head of the government of the Republic of Panama, General Omar Torrijos. Your Excellencies, Chiefs of State, Chiefs of Government, distinguished representatives of the American republics, ladies and gentlemen, recognizing that we are present at a moment of history, I welcome the Chiefs of State and Heads of Government of the Republics of the Americas to the Organization of American States.
In Panama, they are watching all this too, and in the Canal Zone, where some 35,000 Americans live, they are having a march tonight, a candlelight march, and NBC's Fred Francis is there watching them. Fred?
This is Fred Francis in the Canal Zone. What you're seeing right now is a candlelight funeral march. The people in the Canal Zone, some 500 had turned out at the administration building in the Canal Zone. It's a memorial service. This is the beginning of the end for them. The mood here is one of resignation. These people have lost the will to fight. It's been a long fight for them. The signing in Washington means that everything is over. Their lives are over. The USA, small town America, is over. To the Panamanian people here, it means the end of colonialism. These people don't feel that way. They feel they have one hope left, and that hope is to delay the ratification of the treaty. But as you can see, there are only 300 to 500 that showed up for the candlelight march, and there's some 10,000 people who live here in the Canal Zone. And that shows that they'd rather sit home and watch it on TV, and a demonstration doesn't do much good anymore.
Be worth mentioning as we wait for the signing ceremony that this Panama Canal has been a fountainhead of American emotions since it was begun over 70 years ago. Actually, the French were there before us, trying to build a canal in what was then the province of Panama in the country of Colombia. But they ran into all kinds of trouble and abandoned the idea. So then President Teddy Roosevelt tried to make the same arrangement with the country of Colombia, but they dragged their feet. The United States became impatient, and Roosevelt encouraged the province of Panama to secede from Colombia. And when it did, he signed the original Panama Treaty, the Canal Treaty, which is being replaced, or will be replaced if it is indeed ratified by the two countries, the one that's being signed tonight. And he signed it, incidentally, not with the leaders of the new republic, but with a Frenchman who was appointed to represent them in Washington. And the Frenchmen signed that treaty before the new leaders of the new republic even got off the train and before they saw it. So the revolution in this province of Panama is what got us control in the first place of the canal. The revolution succeeded immediately, protected by the American Navy offshore. President Theodore Roosevelt recognized the new Republic of Panama 3 days later. Roosevelt had a signed treaty when Panama was 2 weeks old. Where the French had already tried and failed to build a canal, defeated by mismanagement, the jungle, and disease, the Americans were determined to succeed. The fight against malaria and yellow fever became an American legend. So did the construction of the canal. Americans considered it part of their manifest destiny for their ingenuity and engineering to succeed. It did, even though it cost over 5,000 lives to accidents and disease, $350 million, and 11 years to finish the 50-mile waterway of lakes, locks, and dams. In 1914, President Wilson pushed the button to remove the last land barrier between the two oceans. What Teddy Roosevelt called the highway of civilization was open. The canal gave us a two-ocean navy, increasing our security and commerce. The American flag flew over the zone, 10 miles wide, where Americans could live like Americans. In time, there would be 35,000 of us living there, And over the years, Panamanians began to notice the Americans lived better than they did. The contrast was obvious, constant, and galling. And in 1959, there were riots against the American presence. In 1964, when 4 Americans and 20 Panamanians were killed in another riot, President Johnson agreed to renegotiate the original treaty. Since then, negotiations have occurred in fits and starts. The Nixon administration agreed in principle to put a time limit on American control, but no treaty came of it. General Torrijos rejected one treaty when he took power. This one he is signing.
As part of the largest group of heads of state ever assembled in the Hall of the Americas, Mr. Secretary General, we are here to participate in the signing of treaties which will assure a peaceful and prosperous and secure future for an international waterway of great importance to us all. But the treaties do more than that. They mark the commitment of the United States to the belief that fairness and not force should lie at the heart of our dealings with the nations of the world. If any agreement between two nations is to last, it must serve the best interest of both nations. The new treaties do that, and by guaranteeing the neutrality of the Panama Canal, the treaties also serve the best interest of every nation that uses the canal. This agreement thus forms a new partnership to ensure that this vital waterway, so important to all of us, will continue to be well operated, safe, and open to shipping by all nations now and in the future. Under these accords, Panama will play an increasingly important role in the operation and defense of the canal during the next 23 years. And after that, the United States will still be able to counter any threat to the canal's neutrality and openness for use. The members of the Organization of American States and all the members of the United Nations will have a chance to subscribe to the permanent neutrality of the canal. The accords also give Panama an important economic stake in the continued safe and efficient operation of the canal, and make Panama a strong and interested party in the future success of the waterway. In the spirit of reciprocity suggested by the leaders at the Bogota summit, the United States and Panama have agreed that any future sea-level canal will be built in Panama and with the cooperation of the United States. In this manner, the best interests of both our nations are linked and preserved into the future. Many of you seated at this table have made known for years, through the Organization of American States and through your own personal expressions of concern to my predecessors in the White House, your own strong feelings about the Panama Canal Treaty of 1903. That treaty, drafted in a world so different from ours today, has become an obstacle to better relations with Latin America. I thank each of you for the support and help that you and your countries have given during the long process of negotiation, which is now drawing to a close. This agreement has been negotiated over a period of 14 years under 4 presidents of the United States. I'm proud to see President Ford here with us tonight. And I'm also glad to see Mrs. Lyndon Johnson here with us tonight. Many secretaries of state have been involved in the negotiations. Dean Rusk can't be here. He's endorsed the treaty. But Secretary of State William Rogers is here. We're glad to have you, sir. And Secretary of State Henry Kissinger is here. This has been a bipartisan effort, and it's extremely important for our country to stay unified in our commitment to the fairness, the symbol of equality, the mutual respect, the preservation of the security and defense of our own nation, and an exhibition of cooperation which sets a symbol that is important to us all before this assembly tonight and before the American people in the future. This opens a new chapter in our relations with all nations of this hemisphere, and it testifies to the maturity and the good judgment and the decency of our people. This agreement is a symbol for the world of the mutual respect and cooperation among all our nations. Thank you very much for your help in this.
The next speaker will be General Omar Torrijos, who is the ruler of Panama for 11 years now.
Tengo el honor de ceder la palabra al excelentísimo señor jefe de gobierno de Panamá, General Omar Torrijos Herrera.
Omar Torrijos Herrera.
Señor presidente de los
Mr. President of the United States,
abro cita.
I quote
Usted y yo sabemos muy bien
from the January 20, 1904 letter from United States Secretary of State John Hay to Secretary Spooner. You and I know too well how many points there are in this treaty to which a Panamanian patriot could object.
Enero 20 de 1904. Cierro cita.
End of quote.
Mi presencia
My presence here, together with that of the most representative leaders and statesmen of the hemisphere, emphasizes the goal of many struggles by various generations of Panamanian patriots. Our people, who have striven with heroic tenacity to perfect their independence, hold no feelings of rancor towards this nation, which, in a giant technological feat, carved the heartland of the Isthmus of Panama and spanned 2 oceans, shortening their distance to 8 hours' time. However, what was a technological conquest for mankind became a colonial conquest of our country through the distortion of history. And I say distortion of history because President Theodore Roosevelt himself declared publicly in Panama on October 19, 1904, and I quote, Mr. President Amador Guerrero, we have not the slightest intention to establish an independent colony in the territory of the Panama Canal Zone. End of quote. Deep within them, what nourished the hopes of Panamanians and fortified their patience throughout these many years was the firm conviction that the North American people have no colonialist ambitions. For you were once a colony and fought heroically for your liberation. We feel, President Carter, that by raising morality as a banner in our relations, you are representing the true spirit of your people. Latin America has supported us faithfully and unselfishly. Its leaders are present at this ceremony to bear witness that the faith and cause of the people of Panama are the faith and the cause of the hemisphere. The presence of these chief executives should launch a new and different era among those of us who live and dwell together in the Western Hemisphere, so that all the remnants of injustice that stand in the way of our being treated as equals will disappear. For being strong carries with it the commitment to be fair, and you have turned imperial force into moral force. Esteemed President Carter, there are two kinds of truth: the plain truth and the pleasant truth. On behalf of plain truth, I want to say to you that this treaty that we will sign shortly, and which terminates the one which no Panamanian ever signed, does not have the total support of our people, because the 23 years agreed upon as a transition period means 8,395 days, during which time United States military bases will remain, turning my country into a possible strategic target for reprisal. Also, we have agreed upon a neutrality treaty that places us under the Pentagon's defense umbrella, a treaty which, if not administered judiciously by future generations, could become an instrument of permanent intervention. Nevertheless, what has been agreed upon is the result of an understanding between two leaders who believe in the peaceful togetherness of their peoples and who have the courage and the leadership to face their peoples with no weapons other than the truth and their deep conviction of what is fair. A plebiscite will be the method of ratification in Panama. More than a plebiscite, it will be the purest civic exercise in the political history of the Republic. Ratification in this country will depend on congressional consensus. My dear friends in the Senate, in bidding farewell, I remind you of the thought of a great man, which is more valid today than ever before. It was Abraham Lincoln who said, and I quote, "A statesman thinks of the future generations, while a politician thinks of the coming elections." I return to my country convinced that the future of our relations rests in the hands of excellent statesmen. Thank you very much.
Now the signing. President Carter signing for the United States, General Omar Torrijos for Panama. Not yet a ratified treaty, but what Torrijos called an understanding between leaders. If ratified, the treaty would give Panama complete control over the canal and the zone on December 31st, 1999. And in the intervening years, a great increase in the revenues from the canal, from around $2 million a year now up to as much as $70 million. After 2000, Panama would have the primary responsibility to protect and defend the canal, but as General Torrijos indicated, the United States is guaranteed the right to intervene to protect the canal's neutrality. Other provisions include the right of U.S. warships permanently to use the canal without any conditions, and American civilians currently employed in the zone to continue in government jobs until they retire. This treaty, still in understanding and not yet ratified, is now signed. In the presence of the leader of nearly every country in the Western Hemisphere. An impressive ceremony designed to impress the American people and the people of Panama, who are watching in Panama on that television set tonight. And Fred Francis is there. Fred?
I'm in the living room of Lori and Tom Wilkerson. They are teachers for the Panama Canal Company, and we've been watching this satellite ceremony, and we've just watched the signing. The Wilkersons are like many in Panama. They stayed home to watch this, watch what most of them believe is the beginning of the end of an era. And Mrs. Wilkerson, you saw President Carter sign the treaty. What are your feelings right now?
Well, I think mostly fear. I'm afraid to stay here and live under dictatorship. On the other hand, if we have to give up our jobs, I really don't know what we can do. So I suppose fear, despair, fear that U.S. is making a mistake, that they don't really understand what's going to happen. I'm concerned about the future of the canal. I know that the Panamanians are not able to run it. They say the Americans are going to stay and train them. But I don't think many Americans are going to stay.
The feelings of Mrs. Wilkerson and her husband are the feelings of most of the 10,000 Americans who live in this canal zone. Their greatest apprehension is that if this treaty is not approved, there'll be violence here, and if it is approved, they will really lose their jobs. This is Fred Francis in the canal zone.
Thank you, Fred. That fear is shared by a number of U.S. senators who will undoubtedly vote against it. We don't know how many will because we don't have an exact count yet. But it is an uphill fight for President Carter to get this thing approved in the Senate. One of the senators who does promise to vote no, Senator Orrin Hatch, is with Richard Valeriani at the Pan American Union building in Washington. Richard?
Thank you, John. Senator Hatch, is the Senate going to ratify these treaties?
I don't think the Senate will ratify the treaties, and I spoke to the president of Panama down there and told him I didn't think they would ratify them, and I hope he's not putting all the eggs in that one basket, and I hope that he'll consider that.
Why not?
Well, I don't believe that the majority of the American people want this. In fact, as I've gone around the country, they don't want it, and the vast majority don't want it.
Why don't you want it?
Well, there are many reasons. I think there are about 12 or 13 reasons why I don't, but number one, I would say that I think that the security interests of this country would be seriously hurt. I don't relish the fact of giving $7 to $12 billion of American property, $350 million in foreign aid, military assistance and loans, and then $70 million a year plus operating the Panama Canal Commission, all on the shoulders of the American taxpayers for the privilege of giving away the canal. I think that's wrong.
Now, the president says American security will not be affected. Is this going to come down to a battle for public opinion between the White House and the Senate? And why do you think you can defeat the president on this?
Well, let me tell you something. 4 of the top admirals who ever sat on the Admiralty, including Tom Moore, who was the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from 1970 to 1974, came in and testified before our subcommittee and told us that it would be a disaster, in essence, if we give away the Panama Canal, especially to unfriendly hands. So I think I'd rather believe those people who don't have any axes to grind, who are retired, who are naval men, who understand the Panama Canal forwards and backwards, than I would believe people who are basically subject to present administration tactics and
Do you think the Joint Chiefs of Staff are under White House pressure to go along with this and don't dare speak out?
I don't think there's any question about it. I think if you look at the Singwab affair and other affairs, I think there's been a quietus put on all of the military. And I frankly think they believe what they're saying, but I think that they are supporting the administration line, and I'd prefer to believe those who don't have any axes to grind, who are retired, who are naval people, who understand that canal, like these other admirals.
One quick final question. Will you filibuster if necessary?
Yes, sir. I think that we'd filibuster this, and we do it for every American, and I think that's what should be done for every American.
Thank you, Senator Hatch. Back to you, John.
Thank you, Richard. The treaty that was signed here in Washington tonight, of course, is not yet binding. 2 things must happen before it becomes international law. The Senate must approve it by 2/3 of those present and voting, assuming a quorum is present, and of course the citizens of Panama must approve it in a national plebiscite. Recent polls show that the majority of Americans are against turning the canal over to Panama, and an NBC News poll taken today shows only 35 senators for the new treaty, 22 against, and 43 undecided. If all are present in the vote, it would mean that they would need 34 to defeat it or 67 to pass it. Now a large campaign for all those votes begins, of course. Tonight's ceremony was part of it. President Carter will continue his campaign, including perhaps a fireside chat and other educational institutions. He already has the approval of former President Ford, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, AFL-CIO President George Meany, the United Auto Workers Union, and perhaps they will be used in the coming campaign for the treaty. And the treaty's opponents plan a huge mailing campaign against it, beginning with 5 million letters to persuade people to persuade their senators to vote against it. It will be weeks or months before the Senate finally votes, and before the Senate will finally decide whether something was changed by what we've seen tonight, whether our relationship with Panama, whether a new chapter between the United States and Latin America was begun, or whether merely a footnote was written in another one of those treaties that was agreed to and not ratified. I'm John Hart, NBC News in Washington. Good night and thank you.